The year was 2475, and humanity had long since joined the great cosmic dance of galactic civilizations. Earth, once a quiet and insignificant speck in the vast expanse of space, had evolved into a key player, sending explorers and diplomats to interact with alien races. Yet despite their presence, they had never truly been a center of attention. That was until the strange signal came. It was unlike anything humanity had ever received before, a garbled transmission filled with desperation, crackling through the cosmos from an unknown region. It was brief, only a few seconds long, but the message was clear in its urgency. Help. Please. They are coming. I can't. At first. Most of the spacefaring nations dismissed the signal. It seemed like a malfunction. But there was something about it that caught the attention of Captain Elena Carter, leader of the Earth exploration vessel Vanguard. She was known for her determination, her ability to take risks when others hesitated, and her sharp instincts. When she heard the transmission, she knew it was important. There was no ignoring it. The signal came from the far edge of the galaxy, from a planet known as Venara 6. It was an inhospitable world, surrounded by dangerous asteroid fields and known for its unpredictable weather patterns. The planet was mostly forgotten by galactic maps, a place where few traveled. Yet the signal had a peculiar signature too structured to be random, too desperate to ignore. Elena and her crew weren't ones to shy away from the unknown, and so, without hesitation, they plotted a course. The journey to Venara 6 took several weeks, a long stretch of time for the crew aboard the Vanguard, but Elena never once second-guessed her decision. As they neared the planet's atmosphere, the ship's sensors picked up strange readings. It wasn't just the odd signal, something was off. The planet itself seemed almost alive, pulsing with an energy that felt wrong. It was as if the planet was watching them. As they entered the atmosphere, the crew braced themselves for what they would find. The landing was rough, the air dense with the smell of sulfur and the ground beneath them shifting as if it were unstable. Elena led the way, her footsteps firm against the alien terrain, the rest of her crew following behind. They were equipped with the best technology humanity had to offer, but even so, the alien landscape seemed to defy all logic. Strange, twisted trees grew at odd angles, and the sky above was filled with swirling clouds of an unsettling purple hue. The air buzzed with an electric charge, making the hair on the back of their necks stand up. Their mission was simple: find the source of the distress signal and offer assistance. What they found, however, was far from simple. It wasn't long before they stumbled upon the first signs of life, a narrow trail leading through the thick foliage. At the end of it, hidden beneath the branches of a massive tree, was a small figure. A girl. She was unlike any human they had ever seen. She was tall and slender, with skin that shimmered in shades of pale blue and purple. Her hair was silver white, cascading down her back in waves, and her eyes were the brightest green they'd ever encountered, glowing faintly in the dim light of the alien forest. She looked fragile, yet there was an unmistakable strength in her presence. She was lying on the ground, blood staining the dirt around her. Despite the injuries that marred her, there was something mesmerizing about her, something otherworldly. Elena knelt beside her, her heart pounding in her chest. There was no time to waste. "Who did this?" Elena whispered, her voice steady but filled with concern. The girl's eyes fluttered open, and her gaze locked with Elena's. For a moment, the two women simply stared at each other, as if time itself had stopped. Then, with great effort, the girl whispered, her voice weak but urgent, "They're coming." Before Elena could ask more questions, the sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence. There was no mistaking it. Someone or something was out there. The girl's eyes widened with fear, and she scrambled to her feet, pulling away from Elena's grasp. "You don't understand," she gasped. "They're not just hunters. They're killers. They won't stop until they have me." The crew of the Vanguard quickly gathered around, trying to assess the situation. Elena stood tall, her mind racing. Whoever these pursuers were, they were not just dangerous, they were organized. And the girl, whoever she was the key to everything. But before anyone could make a move, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the trees. It was a slow, deliberate march, as if whoever was coming wanted them to hear it. And then, from the dense underbrush, they emerged, tall, towering figures clad in dark, jagged armor. Their eyes glowed red, and their weapons pulsed with an eerie, unnatural energy. They were alien, but not like any species the humans had encountered before. These beings radiated menace, and the air around them seemed to bend with the weight of their presence. The girl gasped and took a step back, her hand trembling as she clutched her side. "They found me," she whispered. Elena's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. "Get ready," she said to her crew, signaling them to prepare for combat. They had no choice now. The hunt had begun, and they were caught in the middle. The alien soldiers were not just there for a simple confrontation. Their leader, a tall, imposing figure, stepped forward. His voice was cold and commanding, carrying across the silent forest. "Human," he said, addressing Elena. "This is not your fight. Step aside, or we will take you down along with her." Elena didn't flinch. "Who are you?" she demanded, her hand hovering near her weapon. The alien warrior's eyes glowed with a deep, ominous red. "We are the Tsar. And this girl is ours." Before Elena could respond, the girl let out a low, guttural sound, a mixture of pain and defiance. "No," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I won't be anyone's possession again." The tension in the air was palpable, thick with the promise of violence. The Tsar were here to claim the girl, and Elena knew that if they didn't act fast, it would be too late. But what was so special about this girl? What made her so important that these ruthless beings were willing to do anything to capture her? Elena's mind raced, but there was no time to ponder it further. The fight for survival was about to begin, and nothing was certain anymore. The air was thick with tension, each second stretching longer than the last. Elena could feel the weight of the situation pressing on her chest, her hand gripping her weapon tighter, the cool metal of her rifle a stark contrast to the rising heat in her body. The Tsar, towering and intimidating, stood motionless, their glowing red eyes fixed on her and her crew. The alien leader, a hulking figure cloaked in dark, battle-worn armor, took a step forward, his boots crunching the dead leaves beneath him. His voice rang out in the silence, cold and commanding. "This doesn't concern you, human," he said, his accent thick and alien, but the threat in his tone clear. "Move aside, or we will deal with you as we have dealt with countless others." Elena didn't move. She stood her ground, her heart racing, but her expression unyielding. She could sense her crew behind her, ready for whatever came next, but she also felt the alien girl's terrified gaze upon her. There was something about the girl, something more than just her otherworldly beauty and mysterious aura, that made Elena hesitate. She couldn't place it, but deep inside, she knew the girl's importance went far beyond what she had originally assumed. "We won't let you take her," Elena said, her voice firm and unwavering. It wasn't a command, it was a promise. She had never backed down from a fight in her life, and this was no exception. The girl, despite her injuries, stood beside her, her delicate frame barely visible behind Elena, but there was a spark in her eyes. She wasn't just afraid. There was something in her, a fire, an anger, a power that Elena had seen in only the strongest of people. The Tsar leader scoffed, his lip curling in what could only be described as a sneer. "You humans are fools. Do you truly believe you can stop us? We are the Tsar, the dominant force in this sector. Your primitive weapons mean nothing to us." Without warning, the leader raised a massive hand, and the rest of his forces, who had remained eerily silent, began to move, their armor creaking as they adjusted their weapons, preparing for the inevitable clash. Elena's eyes flicked over to her team, signaling them to hold their fire. This was not just about guns and grenades. It was about strategy. It was about survival. As the tension mounted, the girl beside Elena spoke, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a knife. "You don't understand," she murmured, her eyes darting between the Tsar and the humans. "They've been hunting me for a long time. They don't stop. They can't be reasoned with. If they get me, it's over. For all of us." Elena glanced at her, unsure of what she meant, But before she could speak, the Zayar leader interrupted. Enough! You will not stand in our way. You cannot protect her. She is ours by right. All who oppose us will be destroyed. The Zayar forces began to move in, closing the gap between them and the humans. The sound of their boots hitting the ground sent a chill down Elena's spine, but she didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, her rifle raised and aimed directly at the leader's chest. I'll protect her with my life, Elena said, her voice cutting through the growing chaos. And I'll fight to the last breath to make sure you don't take her. A low growl escaped the Tsar leader's throat, and for a moment, Elena thought he might charge, but instead, he seemed to hesitate, his eyes narrowing. There was something in the air now, something unfamiliar. For the first time since this standoff had begun, the Tsar didn't seem as confident as they had been moments earlier. Elena could see it their warlord, usually unshakable, was momentarily uncertain. The girl Lyria, Elena had learned her name, was trembling slightly, her body weak from her injuries, but her eyes never left the Tsar leader. She was afraid, yes, but Elena could see a flicker of something else in her gaze, something powerful, something dangerous. Don't let them take me, Lyria said, her voice shaking. You don't know what they'll do if they capture me. They won't stop until they destroy everything. The Tsar leader smirked, his confidence returning. She knows her place. And you, human, have no idea what you're dealing with. You have no idea what kind of power she possesses, or how dangerous she truly is. Elena's pulse quickened. She didn't know exactly what Lyria's words meant, but it was clear the Tsar leader did. She looked back at Lyria, her eyes searching the girl's face. What power? Elena asked, her voice steady despite the anxiety that gripped her chest. Lyria opened her mouth to speak, but before she could utter a word, the Tsar leader stepped forward, his hand raised. The air around them seemed to hum, crackling with an unseen energy. Suddenly, with terrifying speed, he lunged forward, his massive hand reaching for Lyria. Without thinking, Elena acted. She threw herself forward, shoving Lyria out of the way just as the Tsar leader's hand closed around empty air. The force of the Tsar's movement sent Elena crashing into the dirt, the impact knocking the wind from her lungs. She gasped for air, trying to push herself up, but the ground seemed to spin beneath her. Stop! Lyria screamed, her voice full of raw desperation. Her eyes were wide with fear as she stumbled forward, raising her hands. The air around them began to tremble, and Elena's heart raced. What was happening? The Tsar leader hesitated, his face twisting in confusion as he looked around, as if trying to understand what was happening. But it was too late. A pulse of energy erupted from Lyria, crackling through the air with an intensity that sent shockwaves through the clearing. The ground beneath them cracked open, and the Tsar soldiers took a step back, startled by the sheer force of the blast. For a moment, the world seemed to freeze. The Tsar leader stood motionless, his armor scorched by the energy. The humans, too, were stunned, their eyes wide as they looked at the girl who had just unleashed something they had never witnessed before. Elena, gasping for breath, pushed herself up and glanced over at Lyria, who was now standing, trembling, but with an air of undeniable power around her. I told you, Lyria whispered, her voice hoarse. I didn't want to do that, but they left me no choice. The Tsar leader glared at her, his eyes burning with fury. You may have surprised us now, but this will not end well for you, human and alien alike, he snarled, his voice low and filled with venom. Elena stood, her pulse still racing. The standoff wasn't over, not by a long shot. But something had shifted. The Tsar were no longer certain. And neither were the humans. Lyria's powers were only beginning to reveal themselves, but one thing was clear, the fight for her life was far from over. The question now was not whether they could win it, was whether they could survive long enough to find out just how powerful Lyria truly was. And with that realization, the stakes of the battle had shifted forever. The air still crackled with the raw energy Lyria had unleashed moments before. Elena stood frozen, her body tense, her heart pounding in her chest as she watched the alien girl. Lyria was trembling, her face pale and strained, but there was something different about her now, something almost untouchable, as if a veil had been lifted from her, revealing a power that lay dormant within her all this time. The Zayar soldiers, momentarily stunned, now looked at her with wary eyes, their once confident stance faltering. The leader, however, seemed more enraged than ever, his eyes burning with an intensity that could melt steel. "You foolish girl." The Zayar leader growled, his voice dripping with venom. He looked at the others in his ranks, silently commanding them to get ready. "You've sealed your fate. No one escapes the Tsar. We will take you, and we will take everything else." But Lyria's eyes were not on the Tsar anymore. She was looking down at her hands, which were glowing faintly with the same energy she had just released. It was as if she was in awe of her own power, and in a way, Elena could understand why. The force that had erupted from her was beyond anything they had seen before. It had sent ripples through the ground, cracked the trees, and burned the Tsar's armor. This wasn't just raw strength. This was something else entirely. Elena took a cautious step toward her. "Lyria, what? What was that?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know what kind of power they were dealing with, but she could tell that it was dangerous not just for the Tsar, but for Lyria herself. Lyria's voice was quiet yet firm as she answered. "This is who I truly am. I have always been able to do this, but I've kept it hidden, for my own safety, for the safety of those around me." The crew of the Vanguard stood nearby, trying to process what had just happened. The Zayar were recovering, slowly pulling themselves together, but Elena knew they wouldn't hesitate to attack again. And the Zayar weren't the only danger. Lyria herself, in this fragile state, was a ticking time bomb. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. "Elena," Lyria began, her voice trembling slightly, "the power I have, it's not just a weapon. It's a curse, and it's what the Tsar have been hunting me for." Elena's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean, a curse?" Lyria looked up at her, her expression darkening. "I was born with this power. It's a gift, but also a burden. The Zayar, many others believe that I am the key to unlocking something they can use to dominate the entire galaxy. And once they control me, they'll control it." Elena's mind raced, trying to make sense of what Lyria was saying. The pieces didn't quite fit. What was it that the Zayar wanted so desperately? What kind of power could Lyria possess that would make entire civilizations go to war over her? Before Elena could voice her thoughts, the Tsar leader took a step forward, his eyes burning with a cold fury. "Enough of this nonsense, girl," he spat. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed. You cannot hide from us anymore. The power within you, it's what we need to complete our plans, and we will have it." Lyria's expression shifted, her face hardening. She took a deep breath, her eyes glowing faintly as the energy within her began to surge again. Elena could feel it, like an invisible force pushing against her, testing her limits. This wasn't just power, it was raw and untamed. And it was terrifying. "I told you," Lyria whispered, her voice barely audible. "I won't let you control me." The Zayar leader, his patience running thin, raised his hand. His soldiers began to advance, their weapons charged and ready. But something stopped them. Lyria's body seemed to shimmer with light, the energy swirling around her like a storm, pulsating and violent. Elena stepped back, her heart in her throat. This wasn't like before. The power Lyria was tapping into now was different. With a sudden, explosive burst, Lyria threw her hands forward, and the energy exploded outward, sending shockwaves through the ground. The Zayar soldiers were thrown back, their bodies crashing into the trees, their armor cracking under the force of the blast. The alien leader staggered, his eyes widening in disbelief as the power from Lyria surged uncontrollably. Elena could see the terror in his eyes. He hadn't expected this. He had underestimated her. For a moment, there was silence. The Zayar soldiers lay on the ground, groaning in pain, their weapons scattered around them. The alien leader stood frozen, his face twisted with a mixture of rage and fear. And then Lyria collapsed to her knees, gasping for air, her entire body trembling as the energy drained from her. Elena rushed to her side, kneeling down beside her. "Lyria, "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice urgent but filled with concern. Lyria's eyes fluttered open, and she weakly nodded, though it was clear that the explosion of energy had taken a toll on her. Her once glowing hands were now dim, her breath coming in shallow gasps. I don't know how much longer I can control it," Lyria whispered, her voice trembling. "The power, it's too much. If I lose control again, I might." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She couldn't imagine the burden Lyria carried, constantly battling to keep something so powerful in check. But the Tsar leader wasn't about to let her rest. His eyes were fixed on her, filled with a dangerous hunger. "This is far from over, girl," the Tsar leader growled, his voice low and dangerous. He signaled to his remaining soldiers to stand. "We may have underestimated you, but we will not make the same mistake again. The galaxy will be ours, with or without you." Lyria's face twisted with pain as she forced herself to stand, her body swaying. She turned to Elena, her eyes filled with determination. "I won't let them take me," she said, her voice fierce despite the weakness in her body. "I can't." Elena looked at her, her mind racing. They were outnumbered, and Lyria was barely able to stand. Yet the power that had just been unleashed still hung in the air, palpable and potent. Elena knew they had only one choice. They had to leave, and fast. The Tsar were relentless, and if they were going to survive, they needed to plan a way to get off this planet and hide from the galaxy's most dangerous hunters. Elena looked at Lyria, her heart heavy with the weight of the truth. "We'll find a way," she promised. "We'll protect you, no matter what. But we need to get out of here before it's too late." Lyria nodded, though her gaze was still filled with uncertainty. She knew this wasn't over. The battle had only just begun, and the true extent of her power was only beginning to surface. The tension on Venara 6 had reached a boiling point. The once peaceful planet, known for its towering forests and crystal-clear lakes, now felt like a battleground. Elena stood at the edge of a cliff, overlooking the vast expanse of the world below. The sky was a deep, swirling orange, the sun setting over the horizon, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The Tsar were coming, and this time, they were bringing everything they had. Behind her, Lyria was silent, her gaze fixed on the ground. The girl was exhausted, her body still weak from the previous outburst of energy. Elena could see it in her eyes. Lyria was barely holding on. Every day felt like a fight for survival. But there was something else there too, something that made Elena nervous. Lyria's powers were unpredictable, raw, and dangerous. And though they'd seen her abilities in action, no one truly knew how much more she was capable of. "Elena," Lyria whispered, her voice trembling slightly, "they're not just here to capture me. They want to erase me. They want to destroy everything that I am." Elena glanced over her shoulder at Lyria, her heart heavy with the weight of those words. She knew the Tsar wouldn't stop. They couldn't stop. They believed that with Lyria's power, they could control the galaxy. But they had no idea what they were up against. The Tsar fleet had arrived in the early hours of the morning. Huge, menacing ships blotted out the sky, their sleek, metallic forms hovering ominously above the planet. The ground trembled beneath their weight, and the air hummed with a dangerous energy. Elena's team had prepared as best as they could, fortifying their position with the limited resources they had left. It wasn't enough. They didn't have the firepower to take on a fleet like this. And with Lyria's strength slowly fading, it felt like the odds were stacked against them. But Elena wasn't one to give up easily. She had led her crew through countless dangerous situations, and this would be no different. They had one advantage: the terrain. Venara 6 was a planet of deep canyons and thick, dense forests. If they could use the landscape to their advantage, they might stand a chance. "Get ready," Elena said to her team, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her insides. "We're not running. We fight." Her words were met with grim nods from her crew. They had been through hell together, and though they knew the odds were slim, they had no intention of backing down. They knew that if they lost this fight, they were as good as dead. Not just them, but everyone on the planet. The first wave of Tsar soldiers descended from the skies, their ships landing with thunderous crashes. The sound was deafening, drowning out the wind and the distant cries of the animals fleeing the chaos. Elena's crew moved quickly, taking positions behind the cover of massive stone outcrops and thick trees. They had no illusions about the fight ahead. The Zayar were ruthless, but they were also overconfident, and Elena intended to use that against them. Lyria stood near the center of the group, her body still trembling with the strain of holding back her own power. She wasn't ready for another explosion, not like the one she had unleashed days before. But Elena knew that if they were going to survive, they would need every ounce of strength Lyria could muster. "They're coming," one of the crew members, Cade, called out from his position. He was scanning the horizon through a pair of binoculars, his face tense. "Lots of them." Elena turned to face Lyria, her voice low. "You don't have to fight if you're not ready, but if we're going to survive this, you'll need to hold off the Tsar. We need you." Lyria nodded, but the fear in her eyes was impossible to hide. "I don't know how long I can control it, Elena. The more I use my power, the more it overwhelms me." I'm afraid Elena placed a hand on her shoulder, her grip firm. "We're in this together, Lyria. You don't have to face them alone. We'll fight until the end." The Tsar had already begun their assault. Their soldiers poured out of the landing ships, their black armor gleaming in the dying light of the sun. The ground rumbled with the sound of their heavy boots, each step a reminder of the terrifying force they commanded. Their weapons, designed to cut through anything in their path, hummed with deadly energy. Elena's heart raced as she signaled to her crew to open fire. The first shots rang out, the crack of gunfire cutting through the air. Explosions rocked the ground as the humans fought back with everything they had. But for every soldier they took down, two more seemed to take their place. The Zayar were relentless. They had been trained for war, and their strength was overwhelming. Elena could see the fear in her crew's eyes as they fought, their ammunition running low, their energy starting to fade. This wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for hope. Lyria stood in the center of the battlefield, her body trembling, her eyes wide with fear. The power inside her surged, flickering like a flame struggling to stay alight. Elena could see it, the struggle Lyria was facing. The Tsar were closing in, and she was running out of time. "Elena," Lyria gasped, her voice barely audible over the chaos. I can't hold it back much longer." Elena turned to face her, her heart pounding. "Lyria, listen to me. You can do this. You have to. Trust yourself. We believe in you." Lyria took a deep breath, closing her eyes for a moment, gathering the last of her strength. The Zayar were only yards away now. Elena could feel the shift in the air, a powerful force building around them. She knew Lyria was about to do something unimaginable. With a sharp cry, Lyria raised her hands, and the air around her shimmered. A wave of energy exploded outward, stronger than anything Elena had ever felt before. It hit the Tsar soldiers with the force of 1,000 storms, sending them flying through the air like rag dolls. The ground trembled violently beneath their feet as the very landscape seemed to shudder under the weight of Lyria's power. But as the wave of destruction passed, Elena saw the toll it had taken on Lyria. The girl's body collapsed to the ground, her energy spent. Her breathing was shallow, and her skin was pale, as if the life had been drained from her. "Lyria!" Elena shouted, rushing to her side. But the girl's eyes were closed, her body limp. The Zayar leader, who'd been thrown back by the force of the blast, slowly rose to his feet, his expression twisted in fury. "You think you can defeat us?" he growled, his voice full of hatred. "You think one human and one broken alien can stand against the might of the Tsar?" But Lyria's eyes flickered open, and she managed to smile weakly. "We're not finished yet," she whispered, her voice full of defiance. Elena looked at her, determination hardening in her chest. The battle was far from over. But with Lyria's power, they still had a chance. The war for Vanara 6 had just begun, and the Tsar had underestimated them. And they were about to learn the cost of that mistake. The battlefield was nothing like it had been just hours ago. What had once been a beautiful forest, a planet full of life, was now scarred and broken. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid scent of burning metal. The Zayar were relentless, their soldiers swarming the terrain in massive numbers, their weapons never ceasing. Yet despite the overwhelming odds, Elena and her crew had fought back, driven by a singular force hope. But as the dust settled and the sounds of gunfire and explosions faded into the distance, Elena knew that the battle was far from over. The Zayar had not yet revealed their true power, and the greatest threat was still to come. Lyria lay unconscious beside Elena, her fragile form almost lost in the chaos around them. Her body had taken too much power, too much strain. The girl had given everything in her last desperate act to push back the Tsar. But even that might not have been enough. Elena's heart clenched as she looked down at Lyria, the weight of the responsibility pressing heavily on her chest. They had come so far together. She couldn't lose her now, not after everything, Elena. Lyria's voice was weak, barely a whisper. But Elena heard it. She turned to the girl, her breath catching in her throat. Lyria's eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, Elena saw a flicker of something determination, perhaps, or maybe fear. Whatever it was enough to send a shiver down Elena's spine. "Lyria," Elena said softly, crouching beside her. "Stay with me. We're almost there. We'll get you somewhere safe. Just hang on a little longer." But Lyria's hand reached out weakly, grasping Elena's wrist. "No." "Elena, listen," she gasped, her voice strained. It's too late." "No, it's not," Elena insisted, shaking her head. "You're not giving up. We're not giving up. You've already done more than enough." Lyria's lips curled into a faint smile, one that didn't quite reach her eyes. She knew the truth, just as Elena did. They both understood the weight of the situation now. They had fought hard, they had resisted with everything they had, but the Tsar were still coming. And worse, Lyria knew what was coming next. Lyria's breath hitched, and she paused to collect herself. Her body trembled as she tried to sit up, but the effort was too much. She collapsed back onto the ground with a soft groan. "I can't stop it," she whispered. "I can't control it anymore." Elena felt the panic surge inside her chest. "What are you talking about, Lyria? What can't you stop?" "The power," Lyria said with a strained laugh. "It's not just mine anymore. The more I use it, the more it consumes me. The Zayar, they triggered something I didn't know was possible. If I don't stop it, if I can't control it." She trailed off, her eyes closing as if the mere thought was too much to bear. Elena felt a cold wave of dread wash over her. "What do you mean, triggered something? What will happen if you can't stop it?" Lyria's eyes opened again, and her gaze met Elena's, filled with a mixture of sorrow and acceptance. "It will destroy everything. Not just the Tsar. It will destroy everything around me. It will destroy you. Destroy this planet. Everything." Elena's stomach dropped. The thought was unthinkable. She shook her head, refusing to believe what Lyria was saying. "You're not serious. We'll find another way. We'll fight until we win." But Lyria only shook her head weakly. "There's no time. The Zayar know I'm the key to all of this. They'll keep coming for me. But if they get too close, if they get their hands on me, they'll control me. And that's when the true devastation begins. I can't let that happen, Elena. I won't." The gravity of her words struck Elena with the force of a hammer. Lyria, for all her incredible power, was just a girl trapped in a war that was bigger than she could understand, bigger than she could control. And now, it was too late. The Zayar were closing in. The only way to stop them, to stop the power from consuming everything, was for Lyria to make the ultimate sacrifice. "No," Elena whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "There has to be another way. There has to be," but Lyria's hand squeezed hers gently, stopping her words in their tracks. "There isn't. You have to promise me something, Elena," she said, her voice firm despite her weakening body. "Promise me you'll protect the others. You'll protect this world. You'll stop the Tsar from winning." Tears stung Elena's eyes, but she blinked them back, forcing herself to focus on the girl before her. She couldn't let her go. Not like this. Not when everything they had fought for was slipping away. I swear it, Elena said, her voice a vow, a promise she would keep until her last breath. I'll protect them. I'll protect Venara 6. I swear, Lyria, I won't let your sacrifice be in vain. Lyria smiled faintly, her body trembling with the effort of staying conscious. She looked up at the sky, where the shadow of the ZR fleet loomed. It would only be a matter of time before they reached the planet's surface. Her heart ached at the thought of all the people who would suffer because of her. But she knew this was the only way to end the madness. In a final act of courage, Lyria closed her eyes and concentrated, summoning every last ounce of power that remained in her fragile body. Elena could feel it, an overwhelming force building in the air, a storm of energy swirling around them. The ground trembled once again, but this time it wasn't a wave of destruction. This was something else. Lyria was doing what she had to do. The moment the energy reached its peak, Elena closed her eyes, holding her breath. The entire landscape seemed to hold its breath with her. And then, with a burst of light so bright, it nearly blinded her, Lyria's power surged outward, stronger than it had ever been before. It was not a blast, not an explosion of fury. It was something pure, something beautiful and tragic. It engulfed everything: the Tsar soldiers, their ships, and the very ground beneath their feet. The light faded, leaving behind nothing but silence. When Elena opened her eyes again, the battlefield was still. The Tsar were gone, their fleet reduced to nothing. But Lyria was gone too. The girl who had saved them, the girl who had given everything, was no longer there. Elena fell to her knees, her heart breaking into pieces. She had promised. She had sworn to protect this planet, to protect those she loved. And now, the weight of that promise hung heavy in her chest. But as she looked around at the desolate landscape, she knew that Lyria's sacrifice had been the only way. The Zair were defeated, and Venara 6 was safe. For now. And as the wind picked up, whispering through the trees, Elena made a vow that no one else would ever suffer like Lyria had. The galaxy was at peace for now, but she would make sure it stayed that way. She would never forget the price they had paid. Lyria's sacrifice would not be in vain.